It was supposed to be a routine traffic stop. The Arizona sun was dipping low behind the hills, casting long shadows over the quiet stretch of Highway 19. Deputy Jake Harlan rested one arm out his squad car window, sipping lukewarm coffee, just killing time before the shift turned over. Sasha, his German Shepherd canine partner, sat alert in the back, ears twitching, eyes sharp. She never fully relaxed, not even after 3 years of working beside Jake, and tonight would be no exception. That's when the alert came in. Suspicious white box truck headed southbound, no plates, possibly stolen. Responding units advised to proceed with caution. Jake dropped the cup, flicked the siren on, and within 3 minutes was tailing the vehicle on a desolate patch of highway surrounded by sagebrush and silence. The truck's back bumper was rusted, the side panels dusty, like it hadn't seen a car wash since the Bush administration. Jake tapped the lights once more. The vehicle slowed and pulled over, tires crunching against the gravel shoulder. He approached the driver's side window carefully, one hand hovering near his hip. "Evening, sir. License and registration, please." The driver, a gaunt, nervous man in his late 40s, fumbled with his wallet, dropping it twice before producing an ID and insurance slip. Jake glanced at the paperwork. The name was clean, no warrants. He asked a few basic questions. "Where are you headed?" "Delivering produce," the man replied, eyes darting to the side mirror. Jake narrowed his eyes. "Mind if I take a quick look in the back?" That's when Sasha began to growl, low and steady. From the car, her body stiffened, hackles raised. Jake had seen that posture before, when Sasha cornered a domestic abuse suspect who'd buried a toddler under clothes in a laundry basket. Sasha knew something. "Pop the back," Jake said, more firmly now. The man hesitated. "Look, officer, I don't think—" "Pop the back." Reluctantly, the driver stepped out and unlocked the rear doors. Jake pulled one open and blinked. Stacked boxes, labeled avocados, sat from floor to ceiling. He climbed up, poking one open with his flashlight. Fruit. Real fruit. Just when he turned to step down, Sasha lunged forward, barking violently toward the far corner of the truck. "Whoa!" Jake called out. "Sasha, heel!" But she refused. She scratched at the metal floor beneath a pallet, barking harder now, almost panicked. Jake turned back. "What's under here?" "Just crates, officer. Look, this is all legal." "Then you don't mind if I search the space beneath the pallet, right?" The man froze, his jaw clenched. Jake radioed for backup. But something gnawed at him, something more than protocol. He knelt beside Sasha and pulled at the edge of the pallet, expecting to find another layer of boxes. Instead, nothing. Just a hollow thunk. He knocked twice, then 3 more times. It echoed. There was a false floor. Jake stood, heart hammering now. "Step back from the truck, sir." But as Jake turned to cuff the man, the driver bolted. He took off across the brush like a jackrabbit, boots kicking up dust. Jake drew his weapon, but didn't shoot. He grabbed his mic. "Suspect fleeing on foot. White male, 40s, northeast of mile marker 112, possibly armed. Vehicle secured. Request backup." He turned back toward Sasha, who was now pawing desperately at the floor again. That's when he heard it. A sob. A faint, choked, terrified sob, like someone trying not to cry. Jake dropped to his knees. "Oh, God!" He began ripping open the wooden slats with his bare hands, splinters stabbing into his skin. It took 10 minutes. 10 long, breathless minutes. And finally, he peeled back the last panel to reveal a hidden compartment the size of a dog kennel. Cramped. Dark. No air holes. A child, maybe 8 or 9, curled up tight in the fetal position, arms tied with rope. Her cheeks were stained with tears. Duct tape hung loosely around her wrist, half peeled by tiny teeth. She blinked at the light, and then, in the smallest voice Jake had ever heard, she whispered, Is she the one with the dog?" Jake dropped to his knees. "Yeah, sweetheart. You're safe now." Sasha lay beside the truck, her body pressed to the metal floor, tail thumping gently. The girl reached out and touched her nose, and Sasha licked her fingers, soft and slow. If stories like this move you, consider subscribing to Heroes for Animals on YouTube. We bring you real, emotional tales of courage, redemption, and the incredible bond between humans and animals. Every view, like, and subscription helps share these untold stories with the world. Jake carried the girl out of the truck, his arms trembling, not from fatigue, but fury. She weighed almost nothing, malnourished, pale. She hadn't seen daylight in who knows how long. Paramedics met him 10 minutes later. Border Patrol showed up 5 after that. The truck was impounded. They found more signs: tiny socks, chewed fingernails embedded in the plywood, candy wrappers shoved in corners. Jake stood back as they loaded the girl into the ambulance. She didn't want to let go of Sasha. They let the dog ride with her. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. His supervisor called, commending him for the bust, but told him not to discuss the details yet. "Could be part of something bigger," the captain said. "We're working with federal agencies." Jake didn't care. He pulled up the station footage, checking the call logs for the original tip. Strangely, it wasn't there. He checked the timestamp. The file was missing. "What the hell?" he muttered. He tried another system. Nothing. Whoever sent that tip was either inside law enforcement or skilled enough to erase records. Jake leaned back in his chair, staring at Sasha. She stared right back, calm as ever. "You knew," he whispered, and deep inside he felt it. This wasn't over. This was only the beginning. Jake Harlan sat in the dark, the glow of the computer screen flickering against his face like a campfire in a nightmare. His office was quiet. Too quiet for a Thursday night. Most deputies had cleared out hours ago. Outside, crickets chirped in the desert brush. Inside, Sasha lay on the cool linoleum floor, her breathing steady, but her eyes never left him. Jake refreshed the call log again. Still gone. The 911 tip that had led him to the white box truck had vanished. The entire entry, caller ID, timestamp, voice file, erased clean, like it never existed. Jake rubbed his forehead. He knew the system. Calls don't just disappear. Someone scrubbed it. Deliberately. He reached for his radio but stopped short. This wasn't something to report. Not yet. Not without answers. You don't scream conspiracy without evidence. Especially not when you're a small-town deputy in a sleepy border county that hasn't made national news since a steer wandered into town hall. Sasha shifted, ears twitching. She always sensed his tension before he could name it. Jake leaned back, cracked his neck, and pulled up the highway surveillance footage. He fast-forwarded through the timestamp around the traffic stop. Trucks, cars, a motorcycle. Then, nothing. The moment the white box truck should have appeared, the feed cut to black for 30 seconds. When it resumed, the truck was already past the frame. "What the hell?" Jake muttered. "That wasn't a technical glitch. That was intentional. Someone, either with access to the department's internal servers or someone higher, didn't want that truck seen or traced." Jake stared at the frozen image of the next vehicle, an RV with California plates, and felt a cold chill crawl up his spine. The next morning, Jake parked his F-150 outside the county crime lab and stepped in with a thermos of strong black coffee and a Ziploc bag in hand. "Let me guess," said Denise, the forensic tech, barely looking up from her microscope. "You brought me breakfast and a mystery." "Just the mystery," Jake said, handing her the bag. Inside were a strip of duct tape and the torn pink cloth Sasha had pulled from her collar. "Need you to run these quietly. No paper trail. Don't ask why." Denise raised an eyebrow. "Jake, this some cowboy justice stuff again?" "Please, Dee, just do this for me." She sighed but nodded. "Give me 48 hours. "Appreciate you." As he turned to leave, her voice stopped him. "Is this about that girl?" He didn't answer. just walked out. Jake spent the next few hours driving routes. Not for suspects, but for Sasha. Ever since the rescue, she'd been off. Not ill, not injured, just distracted. She refused to eat, refused to sit still. She whined at doors, windows, even paced near the gate behind the sheriff's office like something or someone was still out there. So Jake let her lead. They drove the outskirts of town, windows down, Sasha's snout poking out to catch the wind. Then, just past a row of shuttered motels near a burned-out Denny's, Sasha barked once, sharply, and scratched the window. Jake slowed. "Here?" She leapt out the moment he opened the door, nose to ground, tail stiff. She led him down a gravel alley behind a chain-link fence into a half-collapsed warehouse marked "No Trespassing." Jake followed, hand on his belt. Inside, the air was stale. Dust floated through the light, filtering from broken skylights. It smelled of mildew, rust, and something faintly sweeter, something artificial. Candy? Sasha stopped near a stack of wood pallets. She growled, then whimpered. Jake crouched. There, wedged behind the pile, was a forgotten stuffed bunny, its ear half chewed. Pink fur turned gray from dust. Jake picked it up with gloved hands. On the inside flap was a name. Maya. His breath caught. The girl from the truck. She had been here. He searched deeper, found wrappers, a child's sock, even a strand of hair caught on a nail. They hadn't just stored cargo here. They had kept her. That evening, Jake called in a favor. He sat in his truck, parked under a busted street lamp in an empty church lot, holding a burner phone to his ear. "Tony, I need a trace." "Jesus, Jake, what kind of hole you digging now?" "The kind that ends with kids in cages." A pause. "You serious?" Jake gave him the rundown. The missing file, the blacked-out footage, the hidden compartment, and now the warehouse. Tony let out a long sigh. "All right, I'll dig. Quietly. You sure you want to go down this rabbit hole?" Jake looked at Sasha, who sat alert in the passenger seat. "I don't think I have a choice." The next day brought a storm. Not thunder or rain, but silence. Jake walked into the station and found his desk cleared. Files missing. His laptop gone. "Captain wants to see you," muttered the front clerk. Jake stepped into the office. Sheriff Dan Crenshaw sat behind the desk, lips pressed tight. "You're suspended, Jake." "What?" "You went off record. Touched a federal investigation. Didn't notify command. You compromised a live trafficking sting." Jake stood stunned. "You're telling me there was a sting, and I interfered?" Dan's face twitched. "I'm telling you to go home." "Who's the lead on this?" Jake demanded. "FBI? DHS? But Crenshaw only stared. "You want to play hero? Do it on your own time," he said. Jake turned and walked out. That night, Sasha paced the living room. Jake sat on the floor beside her, watching Maya's interview on the TV. She was safe now, placed in protective custody, but she hadn't spoken since the rescue. Until now, a soft video clip played. Maya clutched the bunny in her arms. When asked what helped her hold on, she whispered, "I dreamed of the dog, the one with the kind eyes." Jake looked at Sasha. Her tail wagged once. He wiped his eyes. They weren't done yet. Later that week, Denise called. "You need to hear this in person." Jake arrived in the back entrance of the lab. Denise handed him a folder. "The cloth and tape both have traces of sedatives, but here's the kicker. The same chemical compound matches with 2 other unsolved abduction cases from 6 months ago." Jake flipped the file. 2 missing girls, same age as Maya, same physical description, same last known location, rest stops near the border. "Jake," she said quietly, "this is bigger than us." He stared at the wall, then back at Sasha. "No," he said, "this is exactly our size." Jake Harlan was officially off duty. Badge turned in. Radio deactivated. Laptop confiscated. No one at the station would look him in the eye. Not after his quiet suspension. Word had spread fast, and though nobody said it outright, the message was clear.
Don't poke around what isn't yours.
But this was his. A little girl had nearly vanished forever in the back of a truck traveling under fake documents and behind fruit crates. A K-9 with better instincts than half the sheriff's department had found her. And someone, maybe a few someones, had gone to great lengths to erase every trace. Jake wasn't built to sit and wait. He was built to move. So, that's what he did. The warehouse with the bunny and the duct tape had been sealed by the time he returned. Local authorities claimed it was being held for environmental review. But Jake knew a cover-up when he saw one. Sasha had sniffed around the outer walls and paced the loading dock 3 times before returning to the truck, with her head low, tail limp. He'd seen that posture before, when she tracked someone and knew she was too late. "You did good," he whispered, rubbing behind her ears, "but I don't think we're done." Back at his house, Jake spread a map of the region across his dining table. He started marking every unsolved child disappearance along the southern corridor between Tucson and Nogales. Then he layered it with transit routes used by independent drivers, ones outside big shipping contracts. The pattern jumped out fast. They were using independent couriers, small-time drivers hauling fake produce or scrap metal. People who weren't tracked closely. People paid in cash. Jake circled 3 key truck stops where incidents overlapped. "I say we go for a drive," he muttered. Sasha wagged her tail softly, then stood as if she'd been waiting for the command all day. The next morning, Jake rented a battered Ford box truck under an alias. He filled it with empty crates, covered in dust and stickers labeled papayas, and drove to the first rest stop on his list, an old gas station with only one working pump and a diner that still served grits in chipped mugs. Jake parked just far enough from the main building to look tired, but not suspicious. Then he waited. Hours passed. Trucks came and went, a few friendly nods, 2 cops who never got out of their cruiser, and a woman who asked if he was selling mangoes. Still nothing. But Sasha kept her nose pressed to the back corner window. Alert. At exactly 7:14 p.m., a white pickup rolled up and parked 2 spots away. A man in cargo pants stepped out, lit a cigarette, and leaned against his tailgate. He looked around too casually, like someone trained not to look suspicious. Jake noticed he never once turned his back to the diner, and he didn't pump gas. Sasha began to growl, quietly, rhythmically. "Behesite." Jake got out, stretched, and made a casual loop past the man. "Evening," he said. The guy gave him a lazy nod. "Long day?" "Hot one, hauling fruit down to Nogales." "Yeah?" "Yeah." Jake waited. Silence. The man took another drag on his cigarette. "Keep cool," he muttered. Jake walked away, heart hammering. He wasn't sure what he'd just stepped into, but he knew the guy was wrong. Something about the way he stood still while everyone else moved. And Sasha never growled without reason. Jake returned to the truck and sat in the cab. He kept his eyes low, watching the mirrors. Then, a few minutes later, a semi pulled into the rest stop. Older model, mismatched trailer, no branding. It backed into the space beside the pickup. The guy flicked his cigarette, climbed into the semi, and the 2 vehicles pulled out together, one following the other. Jake sat frozen. Sasha pawed at the glove box. She wanted out, so he followed. They kept a 3-car distance, far enough to avoid suspicion. The semi and pickup drove south for nearly 30 minutes, weaving through empty farmland and derelict barns until they turned off onto a dirt road not marked on any GPS. Jake killed his headlights and followed slowly. The road narrowed, winding between mesquite trees and dry gullies. At last, they reached an abandoned livestock depot, hidden from the highway and surrounded by rusted fencing. Jake parked behind a slope, covered the truck in camouflage netting he'd kept since his army days, and moved forward on foot, with Sasha beside him. Through a cracked window in the depot office, he saw shadows moving. Crates, flashlights, voices. Then he saw it. A girl, no more than 12. She was barefoot, wearing a threadbare dress, hair tangled, face blank like a ghost. A man held her by the arm. He opened the trailer. Inside were cages. Jake nearly vomited. He stepped back, pulled out his phone, and froze. No signal. They were too far out. "All right," he whispered to Sasha. "We need proof." He crept to the edge of the trailer and snapped a few grainy photos. Faces, license plates. The child. He knew he couldn't take them all down. Not armed with just a Glock and a dog. But he could burn the whole thing down. With evidence. As he turned to retreat, a rock shifted underfoot. "Hey!" Flashlights beamed toward the brush. Jake grabbed Sasha's harness. "Run!" They bolted. Bullets cracked behind them. Bark splintered from a tree. A man shouted, "Get the damn dog!" But Sasha was too fast, too smart. She weaved through thickets, pulling Jake with her, guiding him toward the back slope and down into the arroyo where the truck was hidden. They dove into the cab. Jake peeled out, tires kicking dirt as headlights appeared behind him. The chase was on. They raced down the dirt path, past the highway sign for County Road 218. Jake dialed his emergency contact at the FBI, the only one he trusted. "Tony, it's Jake. I have them. I have photos. I have a location. They're moving girls. Tonight." "Slow down. You're sure?" "I saw it with my own eyes, and they saw me." "I'm on it. Stay alive." Jake ended the call and veered onto the main road. The semi was still coming. The pickup right behind. But Jake knew these roads better than anyone. He took a hard left through a field and looped back onto Highway 82, disappearing into the dark. By the time they reached his rental house, Sasha was panting hard, covered in dust. Jake transferred the photos to a backup drive and emailed 3 copies to trusted friends. Then, for the first time in hours, he sat on the porch and breathed. Sasha curled at his feet. "You saved her," he said. "She just wagged her tail once." 2 hours later, the FBI showed up. By morning, the depot had been raided. 7 girls were rescued, 4 men arrested. But the man with the cigarette, the one Sasha had growled at, was gone. And so was the girl from the trailer. Jake stood at the edge of the raid zone, heart breaking. They hadn't saved them all. Not yet. But they were closer. And Sasha was still tracking. Jake Harlan wasn't sleeping much these days. Not after the depot raid. Not after watching a dozen scared girls wrapped in emergency blankets, trembling under floodlights. And not after realizing one of them, one little girl, was still missing. The one he'd seen with his own eyes. The one who vanished. Somehow, even after the feds moved in, even after the headlines and the press conference, someone had slipped through. Someone who knew how to disappear. And Jake was haunted by the look on her face. That blank, fragile stillness. Like she'd already given up. Sasha hadn't been herself either. She'd taken to sleeping by the front door, ears twitching at the faintest sound. Like she expected someone, or something, to come back. She barely touched her food, refused treats. Every morning, she walked to Jake's truck, tail low, and waited. She was ready to keep going. So was he. The FBI had done what they could. They'd arrested 4 traffickers, traced burner phones to a motel 3 towns over, even found forged documents linking one driver to a missing child in Texas. But it wasn't enough. The man in the white pickup, the one who vanished, was still out there. So Jake went back to the map. This time, he didn't look for places on record. He looked for gaps. Roads not marked. Warehouses never listed. Dead zones where GPS flickered and cell signals died. He found a narrow strip of land between an old rail line and the Santa Cruz Wash. About 12 miles of unpaved dirt road that paralleled the border wall. It was once used by smugglers during Prohibition. Now, no one checked it. He marked the coordinates. "I think we've got a shot," he said, glancing at Sasha. She stood tail raised, ready. Jake had been forced out of uniform, but that didn't mean he was powerless. He still had his training, his instincts, his truck, his dog, and a fake shipment. He rented another box truck, this one with Mexican agri-stickers plastered along the side. Inside, he packed empty crates, tossed in a few rotting bananas from a produce outlet, and mounted a plastic cooling unit to make it look legitimate. He dressed the part, too. Sleeveless flannel, ball cap, worn jeans, a Bluetooth headset he never actually turned on. If anyone asked, he was just another guy delivering papayas to a ghost distributor near the border. He pulled out at dusk. Sasha rode beside him, head low, watching the road. By 9 p.m., he reached the edge of the wash. The terrain shifted. Flat desert turning into scrubby wilderness, jagged stones crunching under the tires. There were no lights, no signs, no power lines. Just dust, dry air, and the faint hum of cicadas. Jake followed the coordinates, keeping the headlights dim. He passed 2 rusted fence posts, a pile of shredded tarps, and finally, about a mile in, what looked like an abandoned produce stand. That's when Sasha perked up. She moved to the back of the cab, stood on her hind legs, and started sniffing the air like it held secrets. Jake slowed the truck. He killed the engine and climbed out. Sasha leapt down beside him. The stand was more than abandoned. It was a shell. 4 cracked walls, a leaking roof, and a chain-locked freezer door that no longer sealed. But someone had been there recently. The sand was marked with fresh tire tracks, cigarette butts, and something else. Tiny footprints. Bare feet. Jake's heart dropped. He walked the perimeter. Sasha kept close, moving quietly, ears sharp. Behind the stand, the dirt sloped into a man-made trench, like a dry creek. Jake followed it with his flashlight. A few yards in, the beam hit something shiny. He knelt. It was a charm bracelet, bent, cheap, plastic, with 3 letters scratched in with a pen. L-I-A. He swallowed hard. The girl from the trailer. Her name hadn't been Maya. It had been Leah. He slipped the bracelet into his pocket. Then he heard it. Not footsteps, not voices. Something far worse. An engine. Coming fast. Headlights appeared on the ridge behind him. They had been followed. Jake ran back to the truck. "Sasha, in!" She jumped in as he threw the truck into gear. Gravel spun beneath the wheels as he turned hard, bouncing down the trench before swinging left onto a utility road barely wide enough for 2 tires. The other vehicle was still behind him. Close. Too close. He could make out the front grille now. Not a pickup. A black SUV. No plates. Whoever it was, they weren't trying to scare him. They were trying to silence him. Sasha barked once, loud, sharp. Jake gunned the gas. He veered off the utility road and into open terrain. Rocks slammed the undercarriage. The truck bounced wildly. A normal driver would have flipped by now. But Jake had driven convoys through Afghanistan. He wasn't going down easy. They reached an outcropping of boulders near the southern ridge. Jake yanked the wheel and slid the truck behind the rocks. He cut the lights, killed the engine. Then he waited. The SUV crested the hill moments later. It slowed, stopped, then backed up, disappearing into the brush. Jake held his breath. Sasha didn't move. Only after 10 minutes of silence did she sit back and whine. They were gone. For now, he stayed the night in the truck, sleeping in shifts. By dawn, he was walking the ridge with Sasha, looking for trails, clues, anything. That's when Sasha froze. She sniffed the air and turned left, toward the ravine. Jake followed. She moved faster now, ears alert, nose to ground. Every few seconds, she looked back, making sure he was coming. They walked a quarter mile. Then Sasha stopped, in front of a metal hatch buried beneath dried branches. Jake crouched and pulled. It groaned, rust flaking as it gave way. Inside, a short tunnel, maybe 5 feet deep. And at the end, a crate. It was empty now, but the inside had scratches, fingerprints, bits of duct tape. Jake's breath caught. They'd used this as a drop point. He radioed Tony. "I found something." Tony's voice was groggy. "Jake, it's 6 a.m. They're using old tunnels, border storage. I found a hatch, still warm. You've got GPS coordinates? Sending them now." There was silence on the line. Then, Jake, this is turning into something bigger than I thought. Jake stared into the crate. I think it already was. That afternoon, Jake returned home to find his front door cracked open. He froze. Sasha growled, deep, primal. Gun drawn, Jake stepped inside. Furniture overturned, drawers pulled, files scattered. They'd searched everything,
But they hadn't taken anything.
just sent a message. Jake found a single slip of paper taped to the fridge. Body, one word. Stop! He stood there for a long time, then walked outside, sat on the porch, and pulled out the bracelet. Leah. He looked down at Sasha. We're not stopping. Jake Harlan had always known how far he was willing to go for justice. But standing in the middle of his ransacked kitchen, holding a slip of paper with one word, stop, he realized something deeper. This wasn't just about trafficking anymore. This was about intimidation. This was about control. This was personal. Sasha paced behind him, hackles raised, tail stiff. Her instincts were louder than any siren. She wasn't just alert, she was angry. Someone had come into their space, their home, and they'd left more than a message. Jake called Tony immediately. You said this was getting big, Jake said. It's here now.
Tony didn't ask questions. Are you safe?
No, but I'm not backing off. I'm working parallel, Tony replied. Feds are getting heat from above. Some of the files from the depot are sealed now. DHS involvement. Jake rubbed his forehead. You think someone inside tipped them off? I think someone inside is on the payroll. There was silence on the line. Then Tony added, Jake, you're being watched. Your internet searches, your calls, even this burner, probably compromised. Jake looked around the room, now aware of every creak in the floorboards. I've got physical evidence. I've got Sasha. I'm not done. Tony sighed. You'd better be sure, buddy. Because if they feel cornered, they'll come for you next. Jake hung up. He was already sure. 2 days passed without incident. Jake laid low, staved off his cell, made Sasha sleep in the bedroom with the door locked. He changed his routes, avoided patterns, and kept a sidearm at his waist at all times. But tension brewed like a storm cloud over every minute. Then, on the third night, it happened. Jake had just stepped out onto the back porch when Sasha bolted from his side, barking ferociously. A shadow moved along the fence line. Jake drew his weapon. Hey, stop! The shadow fled. Jake sprinted after it, heart pounding, adrenaline firing through his chest. Sasha took the lead, streaking across the yard and leaping the fence like it was nothing. They gave chase through a row of mesquite trees, past the old irrigation ditch, and toward the service road. The figure darted into the brush. Jake followed. Then, a crack. A yelp. Not just any yelp. Sasha's. Jake's blood ran cold. He found her lying in the grass, whimpering, paw curled under her chest. No, no, no. He scooped her up, tears already filling his eyes. Back at the truck, he saw it. A shallow gash along her ribs. Not deep, but deliberate. A knife wound. They hadn't tried to kill her. They'd tried to send a message. Jake patched the wound with his emergency kit. Sasha whimpered as he worked, but didn't fight him. You're okay, he whispered. You're tougher than they are. By dawn, she was stable, quiet, but alert. Jake sat beside her on the floor of the guest room, unable to sleep, unable to move. They'd crossed the line. Now he would too. He loaded the truck that afternoon with everything he had. Maps, notes, burner drives, copies of evidence, Leah's bracelet, and 2 photos of Sasha in training, one of which showed her in full K9 tactical gear standing beside a child she'd once helped rescue from a barn fire. Jake stared at that photo for a long time. Then he slipped it into his pocket. He knew where they'd go next. Not where they hid girls, where they moved them. And he finally remembered something. Something the driver of the white truck had said during that very first stop weeks ago. Deliverin' produce. He hadn't said a delivery. He said deliverin', like a regular route, like something recurring. Jake cross-referenced local produce schedules with off-book vendors and found something strange. One small farm kept appearing on shipment invoices but had no listed address. It was a shell. The owner? A man arrested 10 years ago for assault and released early under technical review. Jake smiled bitterly. Gotcha! He drove straight through the desert, ignoring roads, following utility lines, and dry stream beds. The sun burned overhead. Sasha slept in the passenger seat, bandaged but quiet, one paw resting against the glove box. By late afternoon, he saw it. A small gate, a gravel path. No signs, no crops. Just a warehouse-style structure with a faded "no trespassing" nailed into a cactus. Jake parked 200 yards out. He climbed a nearby ridge with binoculars, and what he saw made his stomach twist. Another truck, just like the one before, parked in the rear. 2 men moved crates, and a third escorted a girl, maybe 11, toward the building. Her hands weren't tied, but her posture screamed fear. Jake watched for 20 minutes. The girl never came back out. He made the call. Tony picked up. Tell me you've got something. Jake read the coordinates. Tony whistled. That's 2 counties over. Not in your jurisdiction. Jake replied, voice steady. They've got another girl. There was a pause. Then Tony said, I'm calling it in to my guy. ETA for the raid is 90 minutes. Jake checked his watch. She might not have that long. Jake, don't do anything reckless. I'm not. He hung up, then opened the glove box and pulled out Sasha's K9 vest. By the time he reached the outer perimeter, Jake had memorized every angle, every blind spot. He waited for a cloud to pass in front of the sun before moving. Sasha followed silently at his side, limping slightly but determined. They found a broken panel in the fencing and slipped through. Jake moved fast, hugging the shadows, ducking behind crates, pressing himself to the wall. At the side door, he stopped and listened. Voices, laughter, music. He pressed his ear against the door. A scream. Small, quick, then silence. Jake drew his weapon. He looked down at Sasha. You ready? She growled low. He kicked the door open. The men froze. 3 of them. One turned, too slow. Jake fired a warning shot into the ceiling. Hands in the air. One man reached for his belt. Sasha leapt. She caught his forearm mid-motion, teeth sinking in. The man shrieked and crumpled to the ground. Jake moved forward, gun steady. Move again and I swear it I'll drop you. The others obeyed. He made them lie face down, zip-tied their wrists with plastic cuffs from his belt, and kicked their phones into the far wall. Then he ran deeper into the warehouse. He found her behind a curtain. The girl, Leah, still wearing the same torn dress. She sat on a mattress, rocking slowly, eyes hollow. When she saw Sasha, she didn't move. But when Sasha walked over and nuzzled her hand, Leah burst into tears. By the time the feds arrived, the scene was contained. Jake stood on the loading dock, arms folded. Leah sat wrapped in a blanket. Sasha curled beside her like a sentry. Tony was first out of the SUV. He looked around, took it all in. You just couldn't wait, huh? Jake shrugged. Figured I'd make it easier for you. Tony looked at Sasha, then at Leah. Thanks for not waiting. The sun was rising by the time Jake Harlan walked back into his house. Sasha trailed behind him, slow but steady, her side still bandaged from the knife wound. She moved like a soldier coming home from battle, wounded, tired, but proud. Jake opened the door, let her inside, and set down his gear without a word. Then he just stood there, staring at the walls, the kitchen, the living room. The photo of his K9 graduation pinned to the corkboard next to a faded picture of him and his dad fishing in Oklahoma. It all felt distant now, like a different life, because something had changed. Jake wasn't just a deputy anymore. He was a witness, a target, and maybe something more dangerous. He was the one person who refused to look the other way. Later that morning, Tony called. They cracked it wide open, Tony said. 3 of the men from the warehouse rolled over within an hour of interrogation. Named contacts, locations, distribution routes. Jake didn't say anything. He just sipped his coffee, watching Sasha sleep near the front door, tail twitching in her dreams. There's a ring operating across 3 states, Tony continued. And it's not just children. It's labor trafficking, document forgery, Bribery inside local law enforcement. You were right, Jake. This was bigger than we knew. Jake took a long breath. What about the girl? Leah. She's safe. Hospital says she's strong, considering what she's been through. She won't speak yet, but she clings to that bracelet you found like it's made of gold. And the dog? She hasn't left her side. Tony chuckled softly. She's earned early retirement, that's for sure. Jake looked at Sasha, whose ears twitched at the sound of her name. She's not ready to slow down, not yet. The FBI offered Jake reinstatement, a job, even a commendation. He refused. He didn't need medals. What he needed was trust. And that couldn't be handed out by a PR department. It had to be rebuilt, step by step. So instead, he kept his truck, kept Sasha, and agreed to consult as a field liaison for a newly formed joint task force aimed at identifying trafficking routes using canine units and grassroots tips. They called it Project Garden. Jake preferred Sasha's unofficial name for it, Go Time. A week later, Jake visited the shelter where Leah had been placed under protective supervision. The facility was quiet, clean, surrounded by wind chimes and flowering bushes. It didn't look like a government building. It looked like healing. He brought Sasha, of course. The moment they walked in, Leah sat up straighter on the couch. Her therapist stepped aside as Sasha trotted over, her tail wagging gently. Leah reached out and placed a hand on Sasha's fur. Then she did something no one expected. She whispered, "She came back." Jake crouched beside her. We both did. Tears filled the therapist's eyes. It was the first thing Leah had said out loud since her rescue. As the days passed, Leah slowly began to speak again. First in fragments, then in full sentences. She told them her real name, where she was taken from, how she had memorized the sound of Jake's voice and Sasha's bark from the night they rescued her. She called Sasha the brave dog. She started drawing again, crayon sketches of Sasha with a cape, of herself smiling beside her. One picture showed the white box truck. Another showed a large hand and a little girl escaping its grasp. Jake kept that one. He folded it gently and placed it in a frame beside his coffee machine. A reminder. A month later, Jake received a package. No return address. Inside was a flash drive and a handwritten note. "Thank you for not giving up. E." He plugged the flash drive into an isolated laptop and opened the files. Surveillance footage from the very first truck stop. From the depot. Even from the night his house was broken into. But most shocking, security camera footage from inside the sheriff's office. Someone had captured the exact moment his original tip-off call was deleted. A man in uniform. High-ranking. Jake leaned in closer. It was Sheriff Dan Crenshaw, his former boss. The evidence was enough. Crenshaw was arrested 3 days later on federal conspiracy charges. He wasn't alone. 5 other individuals, including 2 from the county record office and 1 from the local business bureau, were indicted in connection with obstruction of justice and aiding organized trafficking operations. It turned out the E who had sent the flash drive was a junior IT contractor for the county who had stumbled on the footage during routine maintenance. She'd been too scared to speak out until she saw Jake and Sasha on the news. Sometimes courage begins with a whisper. Sometimes it ends with a roar. The final press conference took place in early spring. Jake didn't attend, but he watched it from home, a mug in one hand, Sasha resting against his boots. They played a video tribute featuring K9 Sasha, her photo with the American flag, her rescue stories, even a short clip of her licking Leah's face as the little girl giggled. "She's more than a dog," the lead agent said. "She's a hero, a guardian, a symbol of what's possible when we stop treating tips as noise and start treating them as cries for help." Jake switched off the TV, walked outside, breathed in the desert air. He still drove sometimes, not to chase suspects, but to visit shelters, to speak at schools, to show kids what justice looks like on 4 legs. Leah visited too. She started a school campaign called Safe Whispers, an anonymous reporting hotline for children who didn't feel heard. And Sasha? She finally began to slow down. Her limp became more noticeable, her naps longer. But every time she heard the word truck, her ears still perked up. Every time Jake put on his boots, she still followed. Because heroes don't retire. They just rest between missions. Thank you for joining us on this journey. From a simple traffic stop to uncovering a nationwide trafficking ring, this story wasn't just about one girl or one dog or one deputy. It was about what happens when we choose to see the signs, trust our instincts, and fight for those who can't speak for themselves. Sasha reminds us that bravery doesn't always come in uniforms. Sometimes it comes on four paws, with quiet eyes and an unshakable will. We'd love to hear from you. What would you have done if you were in Jake's position? Would you risk everything to follow a gut instinct, even if everyone told you to walk away? Let us know in the comments. And if you were moved by Sasha's courage, please consider sharing this story with someone who still believes in second chances, found families, and silent heroes. See you in the next story.